Hello everyone, today I'm at the Canada Aviation Space Museum in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. I'm going to take you on a tour. Let's go check it out. Alright, so right above me is called the Silver Dart. The Silver Dart was designed and piloted by Canadian J.A.D. McCurdy, a member of the Aerial Experiment Association. The aircraft's name was inspired by the silvery balloon silk that covered its wings. The Silver Dart was constructed in Hammondsport, New York, where it was first flown by the AE in December 1908. The craft was then transported to Baddeck, Nova Scotia, where the group founder, Alexander Graham Bell, had a summer home. The Silver Dart made its famed flight over Baddeck Bay on February 23, 1909. And here's an image. So this is Baddeck Bay, Nova Scotia, February 23, 1909. With early airplane flights making headlines in 1908 and 1909, wealthy sportsmen began to demand their own aircraft. In Europe and the United States, airplane makers such as Blériot and Curtiss launched companies to fill this niche. In Canada, J.A.D. McCurdy and Casey Baldwin's Canadian Aerodrome Company built the Hubbard II, Canada's first commercially produced aircraft. The First World War highlighted the airplane's many practical uses, sparking a Canadian industry. The Blériot 6 was designed in 1908 by French engineers Louis Blériot and Raymond Saulnier. When Blériot made the first airplane flight across English Channel in 1909, it sparked a flurry of interest and purchase orders. By 1913, Blériot had set up factories in France, Italy, and England and had built over 800 airplanes. Some companies constructed Blériot airplanes under license. Others copied the successful design when creating their own craft. And here's some images. The McDow Monoplane. Robert McDowell was a civil engineer and land surveyor in Owen Sound, Ontario. He was inspired to build his own aircraft after seeing flying machines while visiting England and France. Over the course of several winters, McDowell spent his free time constructing this monoplane in a local carriage shop. Like many aircraft built by enthusiasts at this time, McDow Monoplane never truly took to the air, although it did make a few successful hops. So this one's called the Maurice Farman S11 Short Thorn. There's a picture of it in 1956, in 1925. So the Maurice Farman S11 first flew in 1913. Initially built in France, this military airplane was later produced in the United Kingdom and Italy to keep up with wartime demand. By the time the last S-11 was assembled in 1916, nearly 4,000 had been produced. Tough and reliable, this aircraft was used for observation and light bombing. As the air war evolved, the S-11 was no match for newly developed fighter planes. Most were used for military training during the second half of the war. So this one is called the Stopwith ship Camel. Here's a picture of it in 1918. Here's a picture of it in 1936 in Ottawa. So towards the end of the First World War, the Royal Naval Air Service, RNAS, operated land-based aircraft, seaplanes, and airplanes that took off from warships. In 1917, the RNAS decided to replace its ship-based aircraft with Stopwith Camels, one of the most widely flown British fighter planes at the time. The Camel was modified, and the resulting ship Camel had shortened wings, a detachable rear fuselage, and different weaponry. Ship Camels were mainly launched from large warships to attack German airships patrolling the North Sea. William George Barker. William Barker of Daphne, Manitoba, is Canada's most decorated war veteran. He first served with the Mounted Infantry in 1914, but transferred to the Royal Flying Corps 2 years later. Barker attained 50 aerial victories. August 1st, 1930, the R-100 arrives in Canada. Really neat model of the R-100 airship. Here is a picture of it in 1930. So, the R-100 was one of 2 British experimental airships built in the 1920s. At the time, many thought airships were the future of transoceanic travel. They were faster than seagoing ships and flew farther than airplanes. The R-100 crossed the Atlantic in 1930. It moored in Saint-Hubert, Quebec, and went on to fly over Ottawa and Toronto. Britain's other airship, the R-101, was destroyed on its way to India in October, ending the British airship program. The R-100 was scrapped in 1931 to 1932. Right, so this one's called the Curtiss HS2L. Here's a picture in 1977, the museum staff building the HS2L reproduction. (1922), Love engines soon after it crashed in September 1922. This is 1969, museum staff posed with the recovered hull. Curtiss Airplane and Motor developed the HS2L in 1917 for the U.S. Navy. Produced by several firms, this was the only widely used American combat aircraft during the First World War. The HS2L pioneered Canada's bush flying industry. After the war, surplus aircraft flown by civilian operators allowed access to remote areas where lakes and rivers were the only place to touch down. The HS2L was the first aircraft used for regular airmail, passenger services, and forestry patrol in Canada. So this one is called the Junkers JI. This is 1919. This is in 1917. The Junker JI marked a major transition in aircraft construction. Before the JI, almost all airplanes were built of wood and fabric, relatively fragile materials. First flown in 1917, this aircraft had a metal structure. The wings and tail were covered in aluminum. The front half of the body was made of steel plates, while the rear had an aluminum frame. This made the aircraft incredibly strong and resistant to ground fire, perfect for low-level observation and ground attack. Only 227 JIs were ever built. So this one is called the AEG G4. This is in 1919. AEG was a major German industrial company that branched into airplane production from 1912 to 1919. The company built its first G-series Grossflugzeug, or large airplane, in 1915. Several models were produced in small numbers before the G4 went into production in 1917. The G4 was tough, reliable, and able to carry a sizable bomb load. It was used for short-range bombing missions, particularly at night, so it was usually covered with a dark lozenge camouflage pattern. In all, 325 G4s were produced in 1917 and 1918. The Nieuport 12. So this is it in 1916, a Royal Naval Air Service manufactured in Scotland. Military airplanes were first used to observe the enemy. The Nieuport 12, introduced in 1915, was designed for this task. The airplane was also used to escort France's bombers. The Nieuport 12 lower wing is shorter and narrower than its upper wing, improving visibility, maneuverability, and stability. Despite this, the airplane was unpopular with air crews due to its limited performance. As the war progressed, the Nieuport 12 was flown by several Allied countries: France, the United Kingdom, and Russia. So this is the de Havland Canada Beaver. Here's a picture of it in 1947. Moments after the first flight of the Beaver prototype, the airplane on display. Here's a picture of it in 1980 in Saskatchewan. In 1960 in the Northwest Territories. As the Second World War was ending, the de Havilland Canada, DHC, wanted to build upon its wartime growth. For the first time, the company designed its own airplanes, the military Chipmunk and the civilian Beaver. Many of Canada's bush planes were aging, so the Beaver answered a commercial need. Ironically, most were purchased for military use. The U.S. Army alone ordered 980 Beavers. From 1947 to 1969, DHC built roughly 1,690 Beavers. In the early 2020s, about 750 were still registered to fly in North America. The Stinson Reliance. Here's one in 1983 and in 1947, 1939. Like many bush planes, Reliance were actually designed for light transport. The original version, first flown in 1933, sold well in the U.S. despite the Great Depression. Canadians imported more than 30 Reliance in the 1930s and 1940s. All but one were later gull wing models. During the Second World War, the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm used Reliance for navigation training. Many of these aircraft would have a second life as civilian bush planes. In all, Stinson produced about 1,325 Reliance. The Travel Air 2000. It's a picture from the 1930s. It's another picture from the 1930s. 1929 in Ottawa. In 1925, Walter Beach, Clyde Cessna, and Lloyd Stearman, future giants in aviation, formed the Travel Air Manufacturing Company. The Travel Air 2000 had a steel tube fuselage, and although not flashy, this reliable aircraft was a strong seller. The Model 2000 was nicknamed the Wichita Fokker because it resembled the German Fokker D7. A few Travel Air 2000 stood in the D7 in 1920s and 1930s war films. The Dehavlandhusmoth. This picture of it in 1932 in Toronto. In 1932 again. In 1931, where they assembled them. In Dempsey, Ontario. Husmoths were commonly flown for both recreational and business. They were popular with private pilots and flying taxi services wanting the comfort of an enclosed cabin. These fuel-sipping aircraft performed several famous long-distance flights in the 1930s. Some also used for military training and light transport. The RCAF flew 13 Husmoths before the Second World War. Produced from 1929 until 1933, roughly 285 were made, including about 25 assembled by de Havilland Aircraft of Canada. The Fairchild FC-2W2. 1929 expedition team with its FC-2W2 and sled dogs searching for mineral deposits in northern Canada. 1935. Here in 1944 in the Yukon. Fairchild Aerial Surveys designed an airplane in 1926. Not satisfied with other aircraft on the market, the company designed the FC-1. They developed a family of similar FC-2 aircraft, including the larger FC-2W2. Fairchild's rugged airplanes were soon sought by Canadian bush pilots. Given this popularity, Fairchild opened a subsidiary in Longueuil, Quebec in 1929. The RCAF purchased more than 40 Fairchilds for aerial mapping and transport missions. Roughly 325 FC-type aircrafts were produced. The Fecteau airplane skis. Arthur Fecteau, 1910 to 1987, was a very important bush pilot in northern Quebec. He operated the A. Fecteau Transport Ariane from 1945 to 1967. Fecteau developed these skis in the late 1940s for use in their Junkers W-34 airplane. The Junkers W-34. So here's a picture of it in 1962, arriving from Kamloops, British Columbia. This was the last ever flight of the W-34 type aircraft in Ottawa. So the first Junkers W-34 flew in 1926. Rugged and reliable, its design was based closely on the Junkers F-13, the first all-metal commercial aircraft. While the aircraft was sought after in Canada, only 9 W-34s and near identical W-33s were imported due to heavy tariffs. W-34s were flown for military and commercial purposes in about 30 countries. Germany's Air Force, the Luftwaffe, would use the aircraft for instrument and navigation training and during the Second World War. This is the Ford 3-ton truck, Ford Motor Company, United States, 1925. The Lover. Wow. Let's see underneath. Alright, so this one is called the Avro Lancaster. (1944) assembly line. Right. So, the Lancaster was the most successful night bomber of the Second World War. Its massive weapons bay enabled it to carry ever larger bombs as the war progressed. The Lancaster MKX was built in Malton, Ontario by Victory Aircraft, a government-owned company. The first Canadian-made LANC flew in August 1943. The MKX served with RCAF squadrons in the United Kingdom. After the war, many Lancasters returned to Canada, where they were used for maritime patrol, search and rescue, and aerial mapping. And here's a bunch of bombs. And they go here. This is a Ford GP utility truck. Ford's lightweight all-terrain vehicle is an icon of the Second World War. Ford made relatively few GPs. They mainly manufactured GPW models designed by Willys Overland Motors. All of these vehicles would come to be known as Jeeps. So this one is called the Supermarine Spitfire. This is a picture from 1938. The graceful and responsive Spitfire was introduced in 1938. This aircraft saw action in every major Royal Air Force battle of the Second World War. Spitfires played a crucial role in the Battle of Britain, where they often took on the Luftwaffe formidable Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. Many Royal Canadian Air Force RCAF squadrons flew Spitfires. These aircraft remained in production throughout the war, continually evolving to improve performance. More than 20,000 Spitfires were built before the end of the conflict. So, this is George Frederick Buzz Burling. He lived December 6, 1921 to May 20th, 1948. So George Burling of Verdun, Quebec, was Canada's leading fighter pilot during the Second World War. He is credited with shooting down 31 aircraft, including 27 in 14 days over the Mediterranean island of Malta. So this is called the Westland Lysander. Coastal Patrol 2012. Anticipating war, the Royal Air Force ordered the Lysander in 1936. The Lizzy was a solid observation aircraft. It could take off from a farmer's field and almost hover in a strong wind, but warfare was changing. Germany's lightning-fast style of ground assault and new advanced fighter planes made traditional observation aircraft like the Lysander obsolete. From 1940 on, the aircraft was repurposed for less dangerous roles, including coastal patrol and sea rescue. A few Lysanders also flew night missions, shuttling secret agents into occupied Europe. So this is 1940 and 1949, 1941, the folding paratroop bicycle. The bicycle was designed to help paratroopers move more quickly after landing. Ironically, they were used mainly by British and Canadian infantry soldiers, not paratroopers, after the Normandy landing in 1944. Okay, so this one's called the Fairy Swordfish. Here's a picture of it in 1943, 1965, again 1943. So the Swordfish was one of the Royal Navy's main airplanes. Introduced in 1936, it was primarily used as a torpedo bomber and an anti-submarine aircraft. The fabric-covered biplane looked like a relic from the First World War. It flew quite slowly, but this proved to be an asset. Slower airplanes need less distance for takeoff and landing, making it possible for the Swordfish to fly reliably from the small aircraft carriers that escorted merchant convoys across the choppy Atlantic Ocean. The Henkel Hay 162 Volkswager. So designed and produced at breakneck speed. The Volkswager, or People's Fighter, was designed and built in only 90 days. The inexpensive wood and metal airplane could be assembled by semi-skilled, often forced laborers. Germany planned to construct thousands of these jet fighters and provide training to novice pilots using only gliders. This desperate plan was never realized because the war came to an end. Very few of these aircraft saw action, and exact production numbers are unknown. So this is the Messerschmitt Bf-109. An image from 1941. Soviet troops examine a damaged Bf-109 in Russia. 1940. 1943, assembling the Bf-109 fuselage. In 1933, Germany began to restore its military. Building an air force was a priority. As a result, Willy Messerschmitt designed the modern Bf-109 fighter. Key innovations including an all-metal structure, retractable landing gear, and an enclosed cockpit. The aircraft entered service in 1937 and remained one of the world's best fighters until 1942. More than 33,000 were built, making the Bf-109 one of the most produced military aircraft in history. So this is the Mauser automatic cannon. Heavy weapons were required to shoot down a large bomber. Cannons like the Mauser can display on display were produced by several companies during the war. They would often have been mounted inside many Luftwaffe aircraft. So this one is called the North American Harvard. And there's a picture in 1952 producing Cold War Harvards at the Canadian Car and Foundry in Thunder Bay, Ontario. In 1941, this is British Prime Minister Winston Churchill in front of a Harvard at No. 2 Service Flying Training School in Ottawa. Most Canadian trained fighter pilots flew Harvards after basic training. The Harvard was based on an existing U.S. Army Air Corps aircraft. The RAF ordered this foreign airplane in 1938. They needed trainers quickly, and the American supplier could deliver within months. Meanwhile, Norwegian Aviation of Cartierville, Quebec, secured the rights to produce Harvards. Canadians would build many of the aircraft ordered by the BCA-TP schools nationwide. In later years, Canadian Car and Foundry would construct Harvards to support Cold War rearmament. The Canadian aircraft industry and the BCA-TP, 1940 to 1945. Canada's pre-war aircraft industry consisted of 8 small manufacturers which employed about 4,000 people. In the first year of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, the BCA-TP, Great Britain and the United States supplied most of the training aircraft. The impetus of war, however, caused the Canadian industry to expand dramatically, and soon all of the required training aircraft were built in Canada. With an expanded workforce of 116,000, many of them women, a total of 16,418 aircraft were produced for the war effort. Of this number, 10,544 were elementary and advanced training types such as the Fleet Finch, Dehavlandhusmoth, the Fairchild Cornell, Avro Anson, Bristol Bolingbroke, and North American Harvard. This front end section of a Lancaster has been restored to a wartime configuration. Its crew and their duties are as follows. The pilot, regardless of rank, the pilot is almost always in command of the aircraft. The navigator. While directing frequent changes of course amidst constant weaving, both in order to avoid Luftwaffe defenses, it was the navigator's job to find the way to the target, and after the drop, the way home again. The flight engineer. This crewman was a second pair of hands and eyes for the pilot. He had control of the throttle and pitch settings and took charge of landing flaps and undercarriage operations. The bomb aimer. The task of the bomb aimer was to assist the navigator by reading the maps, but 3 miles from target, he took over navigation entirely. In the last 30 seconds of the run, the bomb aimer gave constant directions to the pilot, and as his bomb sight crossed the aiming point, he released the Lancaster's bomb load. Outside these duties, he might also man the guns of the front turret. The wireless operator. The wireless operator governs a battery of radio and radar equipment, increasing and changing with ever new developments in electronic warfare. His instruments range from navigation to target finding aids. And here's a diagram of where they all sat. The RCAF Human Centrifuge. Here's a picture of it in operation in Toronto. In 1941, the Royal Canadian Air Force RCAF Institute of Aviation Medicine developed a human centrifuge, one of the first in the world. It was used to test the Franks flying suit and later air-filled anti-G suits. Before the human centrifuge, G-force experiments took place in the air. The centrifuge allowed test subjects to experience G-force in a safely controlled environment. Researchers could regulate and measure G-force, increasing the accuracy of their experiments. This human centrifuge remained in operation until 1987. You see where the pilots sit and controls. Okay, so this is called a Pia Seki HUP. An American HUP hovers near USS Enterprise, ready to provide rescue services when needed. This is in 2020. This is 1957, Oslo, Norway. Children visiting the museum's HUP during its service aboard the HMCS Labrador. This is 1955 in the Arctic Ocean. So the Piasecki HUP first flew in 1948. Its compact design made it ideal for ship-based operations such as light transport and search and rescue work. The U.S. Navy flew HUP retrievers, while U.S. Army models were called H-25 Army Mules. Nearly 350 were built between 1948 and 1954. The Royal Canadian Navy flew 3 HUPs. All HUPs had retired from military service by 1965, and many were later used by civilian operators. Alright, so this big one is called the Sakorski Sea King. 1972, American Samoa. This image is 2015, the Black Sea. So the Sea King was developed for the U.S. Navy in the late 1950s. Powerful, robust, and versatile, it soon became the anti-submarine helicopter of choice for many navies, including Canada's. An innovative hull-down device nicknamed the Bear Trap enabled the Sea King to land on Canadian warships even in bad weather. Governments and companies acquired civilian versions of the Sea King for passenger flights, rescue operations, and oil rig support. This one is called the Sakorski HO4S. So here's it in 1950, the very first Sakorski S55. This is in the late 1950s. And this is 1953. This is a neat picture. A Sakorski HO4S operated by the Royal Canadian Navy with the majestic Chateau Frontenac Hotel in the background in Quebec City in the 1950s. So the Sakorski HO4S is a naval version of the S55, the first transport helicopter produced in large numbers. Its spacious cabin made it popular for transporting people and cargo. Military uses include rescue work and anti-submarine warfare. Roughly 1,760 S-55 type helicopters were produced, most by Sakorski, but also by firms in the United Kingdom, Japan, and France. The Royal Canadian Navy operated 13 HO4Ss, and the RCAF flew 4 similar H-19s in the 1950s and 1960s. So this one's called the Bell HTL. An early open cockpit Model 47 was Okanagan's Air Service's first helicopter in British Columbia in 1947. This is 1957 in Nunavut. This is 1951 in Korea. So the Bell HTL is a military version of the Bell 47, one of the world's most popular helicopters. Designed in 1945, the Bell 47 was produced for nearly 30 years. It was the first helicopter to be certified for civilian flight and has been used for everything from forest conservation to crop spraying. There were many military variants, including the H-13 COX featured in the television series MASH. As of the early 2020s, there were still hundreds of civilians Bell 47s flying worldwide. This one's called the Havland Manasco Moth. Okay, this picture is from 1943. This one is 1941 in Montreal, Quebec. This is in 1940. This is in 1938, Downsview, Ontario. The De Havilland Aircraft of Canada, DHC, began building Tiger Moths for the RCAF in 1937. Orders steadily increased following the outbreak of war in 1939. Concerned that German submarines would disrupt the delivery of British-built engines, DHC adapted the biplane to use American Manasco engines. DHC produced roughly 1,425 Tiger Moths, but only about 125 Manasco Moths. These aircraft were used at British Commonwealth Air Training Plan schools across Canada. So this is the Boeing Vertol Labrador. There's a picture in 1959. They were testing a prototype. Here's a picture of it in the Arabian Sea in 2013. There's a picture of it in 1990. So the Reliable Labrador is based on the Vertol 107, a transport helicopter first tested in 1958. Most 107s were flown by the U.S. Marine Corps, which operated a variant called the CH-46C Knight. Although most 107s were American-made, many were produced in Japan by Kawasaki. Canada acquired its 107s from Boeing 6 search and rescue Labradors for the Air Force, and 12 transport Voyagers for the Army. Surviving Voyagers were converted into Labradors in the 1970s. Canada's last Labrador was retired in 2004. CAF on the wing. So this is called the Canadair CL-84. Here's a picture of it in 1972. Here is a picture of it in 1964 in Cartierville, Quebec. A crowd gathered for the CL-84 prototype rollout ceremony. So the CL-84 is a vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, aircraft. Its tilting wing allows it to take off like a helicopter, but fly like an airplane. Believing VTOL to be the next big thing, Canadair began experimenting in the 1950s. Their prototype CL-84 first flew in 1965. With interest from customers like the U.S. Navy, the Canadian government funded 3 pre-series aircraft. Ultimately, the U.S. Navy went into a different direction, losing this crucial customer. Canadair abandoned the CL-84 in 1974. So it looks like, and sometimes they do cockpit demonstrations here. So you can sit in these. This is a Lockheed Starfighter. Here's a picture of it in 1961. West Germany, Canadian, and Japanese starfighters flying formation over California. Here's a picture in 1982. And in 1967. So, the F-104 Starfighter entered service in 1958. Designed for speed, the aircraft was initially developed as a daytime interceptor. Canada adopted a later fighter-bomber version in 1959 for its squadrons in Europe. Affordable licensing and potential foreign orders made the Starfighter a strong political choice. Canadair edged out Avro Canada, whose CF-105 Aero had just been cancelled for the production contract. The RCAF's CF-104 Starfighter entered service in 1962. In all, about 2,580 starfighters were built worldwide from 1954 to 1979, including 340 produced by Canadair. And here's a video. The ejection seat. Military jets fly at such speeds that, in an emergency, a pilot cannot simply jump out. Ejection seats are a crucial safety feature, allowing crews to be projected a safe distance from the moving aircraft. This one is the Lockheed C-2 ejection seat from 1958. Canadair CF-116, also known as the CF-5. So here in 1969 shows the production building F-5 type aircraft at Canadair for the Canadian and Netherlands Armed Forces. So images from 1965, the first F-5 Freedom Fighter prototype. Here's a picture from 1986, 3 Canadair CF-116s from Canadian Armed Forces Squadron number 419 during exercises in Cold Lake, Alberta. Based on the Northrop F-5, the CF-116, often called the CF-5, was designed to be simpler and more affordable than other supersonic fighters. The U.S. Air Force often gave F-5s to its allies. Canada began flying the CF-116 in 1968. This was controversial. The RCAF wanted higher performing fighters, but the defense minister thought they were too expensive. F-5 type aircrafts, which could be built in Canada, were ordered instead. Of the roughly 2,600 F-5 type aircraft manufactured worldwide, Canadair produced about 240. Right, so this one is called the McDougall Voodoo. Here's an image from 1970 loading a practice rocket onto a Voodoo at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. Here's a picture from 1978. A flight marshal directs a Voodoo to its parking position in Niagara Falls, New York. The Voodoo was designed in 1951 as a long-range supersonic escort fighter for the U.S. Air Force. Its intended role evolved to include bombing, reconnaissance, and all-weather interception. The aircraft entered service in 1957. Canada acquired second-hand Voodoo interceptors in 1961 for continental defense. These aircraft were the only available option to replace the aging CF-100 following cancellation of the Avro Aero. Roughly 800 Voodoos were flown by the American, Canadian, and Taiwanese armed forces. The last operational Voodoo, a Canadian aircraft, was retired in 1987. So this is an Avro machine gun pack. Avro Canada developed this gun pack for its CF-100 jet fighter. It included the machine guns and their ammunition in one removable unit. Replacing the complete pack was much quicker than loading ammunition for each weapon. So the Avro Canada CF-100. So here's a picture of it in 1960. A CF-100's nose-mounted radar exposed for display at a public event. Here's an image in 1958. A CF-100 flies over an RCAF air defense radar station in New Brunswick. The Avro Canada proposed designs for the CF-100 in 1946. This large radar-equipped jet fighter was a good choice given Canada's vastness and harsh climate. The aircraft was rushed into production soon after the prototype flew in 1950. It was in service by 1952 in time for the Korean War. Flown by RCAF squadrons in Canada and Western Europe, the CF-100 was one of the best all-weather fighters of its day. Avro Canada produced about 690 CF-100s from 1950 to 1958. So this is the Douglas DC-3. The Douglas launched the DC-3, a larger version of its DC-2, in 1935. Designed with a larger body than similar airplanes at the time, like the 10-seat Boeing 247, the 21-seat DC-3 made passenger flights profitable. Versatile military variants, including the Dakota or the C-47 Skytrain, transported troops, cargo, and equipment during the Second World War. Many of these surplus warplanes were converted into DC-3s and purchased by airlines, as major airlines acquired even larger aircraft. DC-3s were repurposed for shorter flights, executive transport, and many other duties. There's lots of these cute little airplane toys that kids can ride around in for fun, to keep them occupied. If you want to bring kids here, Alright, so this one is called the McDonnell Douglas CF-188, the CF-18. So the FA-18 Hornet, a popular multi-role fighter, was developed for the U.S. Navy, Canada. was the first of several foreign buyers ordering 138 Hornets in 1980, designated the CF-188, but more commonly called the CF-18. It replaced Canada's aging Voodoos, Starfighters, and CF-116s in North America and Europe. McDonnell Douglas produced about 1,480 FA-18 type aircraft from 1978 to 2000. Canada announced the purchase of 25 used FA-18s from the Royal Australian Air Force in 2017. The Canadair T-33, the Silver Star. Here's a picture of it in 1955. And here's a cool picture of it flying over the Niagara Falls in 1955. Here's an assembly line of them making it in 1955 in Cartierville, Quebec. So the T-33 is a training version of the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's first widely used jet fighter. Officially named the Silver Star, it was more commonly called the T-Bird. Designed in 1947, the T-31 was first flown in 1948. Roughly 6,550 were produced throughout the 1950s, including about 655 were made by Canadair near Montreal. Robust and reliable, the T-33s were widely exported or donated to NATO countries including France, Greece, Portugal, and Turkey. Most T-33s remained in service into the 1970s. This one's called the Canadair Sabre. Here's a picture of it in 1956 in Cartierville, Quebec. Here's a picture of it in 1955, ground crew working on a Canadair Sabre machine guns. North American Aviation introduced the F-86 Sabre in 1949. Its remarkable performance was largely due to its swept wings, a German concept seized after the Second World War. Canadair built more than 1,800 Sabres. Most were flown by the RCAF in France and West Germany, or exported to other NATO countries. More than half of Canadair's Sabres had Orenda engines, making them even more powerful than the standard model. In all, more than 9,850 Sabres were produced in the US, Canada, and Australia. So this is the WSK LIM-2, the MiG-15. In 1964, maintaining more than just airplanes on a Hungarian Air Force base, note the MiG-15 in the background. So, the LIM-2 is a Polish-built MiG-15, a well-known aircraft conceived by Soviet design bureau Mikoyan Gurevich. When the MiG-15 entered service in 1949, it was the most advanced Soviet fighter ever built. It stunned the Americans during the Korean War, as for the first time, a Soviet aircraft could rival their best fighter, the F-86 Sabre. MiG-15 fighters and trainers were produced in the USSR, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and China. They were used by nearly 40 Soviet-friendly countries. In all, roughly 15,500 MiG-15s were produced. The Boeing Beaumark. So here is in 1959. As a subcontractor for Boeing, Canadair produced about 550 sets of Beaumark wings between 1959 and 1962. And here's a picture of it in 1980. After their retirement, many Beaumarks were used as targets when testing new missiles. From 1960, 4 U.S. Air Force Beaumarks are raised into launch position. The Beaumark is the world's first long-range anti-aircraft missile. Equipped with a nuclear warhead, it was designed to intercept Soviet bombs over North America. Boeing was contracted by the U.S. Air Force in 1949, but actually began the project 3 years earlier alongside the Michigan Aerospace Research Center, MARC. When the missile entered service in 1959, the Soviets were already shifting to intercontinental ballistic missiles, a weapon that the Beaumark could not shoot down. Only 10 Beaumark launch sites opened, including 2 in Canada. Looks like from the side. The Avro Arrow. Picture of it in 1957. There's a picture of it in 1959. So the Avro Canada began designing the CF-105 Arrow in 1952 as a supersonic replacement for its CF-100. Avro planned to build key elements under license, such as the engine, but later opted for cutting-edge Canadian solutions. Alarmed by soaring costs, a newly elected federal government made cutbacks and ultimately canceled the whole program on February 20th, 1959. Stunned, Avro immediately fired 14,000 employees. Every Arrow completed or in production was scrapped, a decision that still angers many. Right, so these are ejection seats. The Martin Baker Mk5 ejection seat is now being delivered in quantity to the United States Navy. This is an advertisement for Martin Baker Mk5 ejection seats. These seats were selected for use in the Avro Aero, November 1957. So, this is a wingtip from the RL-203, the third Aero built. It was the second last Aero to fly when pilot Władysław Spud Potocki took to the skies on February 19, 1959, only a day before the program was cancelled. This wingtip was in the collection of the National Research Council of Canada before being transferred to the museum in 1967. Canada's aviation industry evolved over time until the skies was no longer the limit. Canada has been the leading edge of space innovation in many areas, from satellites to robotics. With Canadarm's success, NASA invited Canada to participate in shuttle missions, and a Canadian astronaut corps was formed. Today, as Canada's space industry continues to innovate and evolve, space-based technologies touch Canadian lives in many ways. Right, so there is a whole Canada in space display here at the museum. I just wanted to show you some highlights of it. So first we've got Marc Garneau's flight suit. And this is Julie Payette's flight suit. So following Canadarm's success, NASA invited Canada to send an astronaut on a shuttle mission. Canada's first team of astronauts was assembled in 1983. This group included Marc Garneau, the first Canadian in space, and Roberta Bondar, the first Canadian woman in space. Canada's astronaut corps was initially led by the National Research Council. The Canadian Space Agency was founded in 1989 to manage Canada's space program. As of 2018, there have been 14 Canadian astronauts with different backgrounds in areas such as physics, engineering, and medicine. So, this is Chris Hadfield's Sokol suit. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield wore this suit when he traveled to and from the International Space Station in a Soyuz capsule. Sokol suits protected astronauts from suffocating should the Soyuz suddenly lose air pressure. Chris was aboard the station for 5 months in 2012 to 2013, serving as commander for just under 9 weeks. Okay, here's a picture of him with the suit. Alright, so next, this is the Canadarm. So, the Canadarm marked the beginning of Canada's role in the Space Shuttle program. Canadarm made its debut in November 1981. In all, 5 robotic arms were built. After 3 decades of service, Canadarm completed its last flight in July 2011. Its successor, Canadarm2, was installed on the International Space Station in 2001. Here are some images of it in space. And this is it in real life. The Alouette, Canada's first satellite. With the launch of Alouette 1 in 1962, Canada's space program was recognized on the world stage. For 10 years, Alouette 1 gathered information about the upper layers of the atmosphere. This data would help engineers to improve telecommunication technologies in remote regions of Canada. A second-generation Alouette satellite was launched in 1965. We're going to go into life in orbit, the International Space Station. Okay, so what is gravity? This is a picture of Julie Payette. Is there gravity in space? Yes, there's gravity everywhere in space. Gravity is strongest near large bodies like planets and the sun, and it gets weaker the farther you move away. On average, the space station orbits 415 kilometers above Earth's surface. At this distance, gravity is only 10% weaker than it is on Earth. Okay, so then what is microgravity? Microgravity is a state in which the force of gravity is very weak, only 1/millionth the strength found on Earth's surface. In microgravity, people and objects seem to be weightless, they float. So, why is there microgravity on the station? This space station orbits Earth at an incredible speed, 8 kilometers per second. While the station's speed pushes it forward in a straight line, Earth's gravity pulls the station downward. Combined, these forces causes the station to free fall along a curved path around the Earth. This free fall creates microgravity environment on the station. Everyone and everything falls at the same rate and appears to be weightless. Come on in. This door is the same size as the station's hatch. Could you climb aboard? Which way is up? There is no real up or down on the International Space Station. In microgravity, astronauts can work on virtually every surface of the station. There are computers, equipment, and experiments on nearly every wall, making the best use of available space. Astronauts continually reorient themselves, relying on visual cues to judge their position in relation to objects and equipment. Astronauts have private quarters where they sleep and store their personal belongings. They personalize this space with pictures, books, and other items. Floating off to sleep, astronauts clip their sleeping bags to the inside of their crew compartments so they don't float around while they sleep. So this is an extra vehicle mobility unit. The extra vehicular mobility unit, EMU, is worn by American, Canadian, European, and Japanese astronauts during spacewalks. Cultural cuisine: Canadian smoked salmon, Russian borscht, Japanese sushi, and South Korean kimchi have all been on the menu. So this is examples of what they eat. Favorite foods can remind astronauts of home. American astronaut Suni Williams' family sent her marshmallow fluff. With fluff and peanut butter, she made fluffer nutter sandwiches or tortillas. Free time on the space station. Astronauts have very demanding jobs. Free time helps them relax and restore their energy. Free time helps astronauts maintain good mental health while working in a stressful environment. Astronauts spend most of their free time enjoying unique views from the station windows, stargazing and taking photos. Many read, play musical instruments, and connect with friends and family online. Simple wonders like playing with water bubbles can be relaxing. So, staying strong and fit. On Earth, gravity forces people to use their muscles for even the most simple tasks. Living in microgravity, astronauts work their muscles far less as they float around the station. This leads to muscle loss and reduced bone density. Astronauts exercise for roughly 2 hours every day to lessen their negative effects using exercise equipment that's specially adapted to microgravity. There's a treadmill in space. That's Chris Hadfield. Here's a cool display of what it looks like, what their view would look like. So you can sit here and watch if you like. Says astronauts on the International Space Station view Earth from a unique perspective. Many astronauts spend their free time gazing out of the station's windows, particularly the large cupola. This 7-pane window is located on the station's Earth-facing side. From this vantage point, astronauts can see and photograph Earth in stunning detail. The station circles the Earth 16 times a day, so every minute offers a new perspective. Here's a picture. Astronauts spend a large part of their day on the International Space Station working with science experiments. The station provides a unique microgravity environment for scientific research. At times, there are over 100 experiments taking place. Astronauts often serve as both researchers and test subjects, working with partners at universities, hospitals, and other institutions worldwide. Their findings have practical applications on Earth and for future space exploration. Man must rise above the earth to the top of the atmosphere and beyond, for only thus will he fully understand the world which he lives. Socrates. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this tour of the Canada Aviation Space Museum here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. If you liked it, give it a like. If you enjoy content about things to do in Canada, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and until next time, happy travels!